Drought is forcing many ranchers to sell their cows and calves earlier than expected.
California's dinner plate is about to get more expensive, and the person running the state just sounded the alarm. As fast-cut images flash from empty pastures to crowded auction yards and soaring beef prices at the grocery store, a quiet crisis is unfolding behind the scenes as ranchers start selling off their herds and the governor steps in to respond. Is this the early warning sign of a beef shortage that could hit every household next?
Part of the plan. No, I've got some show heifers, some fancy heifers that I'm selling today that I normally would keep.
When you hear that cattle ranchers across California are starting to sell off their herds, it might sound like just another farm story that doesn't really affect you. But this one is different. This is the kind of quiet crisis that starts out in dusty fields and auction yards and ends up hitting your grocery bill, your local economy, and eventually the governor's desk. And right now, that's exactly what's happening. Ranchers are making painful decisions, and state leaders are starting to panic about what comes next.
95 cents per month. That's a 1.5% increase on the average Californian's water bill, which is $63 right now, according to...
Out in California's ranch country, the situation has been building for months. Pastures that are normally green and usable have turned dry and brittle. Water sources are unreliable or expensive to access. At the same time, the cost of feed has jumped sharply. Hay prices are high, grain is expensive, and transporting feed costs more than it used to. For ranchers, this isn't just uncomfortable, it's unsustainable. Many of them are now selling off breeding animals, including cows and heifers, which are the backbone of future herd growth. One rancher in the Central Valley summed it up simply, saying, "I can't afford to feed animals. I won't see a return on for another year or two." Another rancher put it even more bluntly, "This isn't about profit anymore, it's about survival." These are the kinds of choices no rancher wants to make. Selling breeding stock isn't like selling finished cattle that are ready for market. When you sell cows and heifers, you're selling tomorrow along with today.
Cattle typically graze on wet green pastures this time of year, but the lack of rainfall means little or no grass.
The main driver behind these sell-offs is a mix of prolonged dry conditions and soaring feed costs. California has dealt with drought cycles for years, but the pressure has intensified. Less rainfall means weaker pastures, and weaker pastures mean ranchers must rely more on purchased feed. When feed prices rise at the same time, the math stops working. Even experienced ranchers with decades in the business are finding themselves backed into a corner, forced to cut herd sizes just to stay afloat. This is where the story moves beyond individual ranches and becomes a statewide issue. When breeding herds shrink, the effects don't show up immediately at the grocery store. Instead, they show up months later, then years later. Fewer cows today mean fewer calves born next season. Fewer calves mean fewer cattle entering feedlots down the road. Eventually, that leads to tighter beef supplies nationwide. The U.S. cattle herd is already lower than last year, and this latest wave of sell-offs only deepens that trend. That shrinking supply chain is what has California's governor paying close attention. When beef supplies tighten, prices rise, and consumers feel it fast. Families already struggling with higher food costs suddenly face even more expensive meat at the store. Restaurants adjust menus, processors feel the squeeze, and rural communities tied to agriculture feel the economic shock. It's not just about ranchers anymore. It's about food security, inflation, and jobs.
Jim Warren's livestock market is selling about 8 times as many cows as it usually does this time of year, and a lot more cattle is expected to hit the market if there isn't significant rain soon.
Processing plants and meat packers are already responding to this reality. Major processors have begun adjusting operations, including reshuffling production schedules and even closing or idling plants in some areas. These moves reflect tight supplies and uncertain long-term planning. When processors don't have enough cattle coming in, running full operations stops making sense. That sends ripples through the workforce, from truck drivers to plant workers to local businesses that depend on those jobs. From the governor's perspective, this is the worst kind of problem because it doesn't have a quick fix. You can't rebuild a cattle herd overnight. Even if conditions improve tomorrow, it takes time for cows to calve, for calves to grow, and for supply chains to recover. That delay is what makes the situation so serious. Decisions being made today will affect beef availability and prices well into the future. Behind closed doors, state officials are worried about how this could escalate. If ranchers continue selling breeding stock, California could lose a significant portion of its cattle industry. That would mean more reliance on out-of-state beef, higher transportation costs, and less control over food pricing. For a state that already struggles with high living costs, that's a troubling scenario. It also raises concerns about rural economies that depend on ranching to survive. What makes this moment especially tense is that ranchers don't feel like they have many options. Most of them want to rebuild, not downsize. But rebuilding requires water, affordable feed, and some confidence that conditions won't worsen. Right now, that confidence is in short supply. Many ranchers are holding on as long as they can, hoping for relief, while others are deciding they can't wait any longer.
Waiting means better prices for beefier calves. That's why Daryl Sweet is feeding his cattle hay and almond hulls.
For consumers watching from the outside, this story might seem distant, but it really isn't. The beef aisle at the grocery store is often the first place these issues show up. Prices creep higher, certain cuts become harder to find, and quality can change. By the time most people notice, the damage has already been done months earlier on ranches hundreds of miles away. The governor's concern isn't just political, it's practical. Food systems depend on stability, and right now, stability is cracking. When ranchers sell off herds in large numbers, it's a signal that the system is under real strain. State leaders know that once ranchers exit the industry, many don't come back. That loss of experience and infrastructure is hard to replace. At its core, this situation is about pressure building from multiple directions at once. Dry land, expensive feed, shrinking herds, nervous processors, and rising prices are all connected. When one piece breaks, the rest feel it. California's cattle ranchers are sounding the alarm in the only way they can, by selling animals they would normally keep. And the governor's reaction shows just how seriously the state is taking that warning. As this unfolds, the big question is whether relief comes in time to slow or stop the sell-offs. Ranchers aren't asking for miracles, they're asking for conditions that make it possible to keep going. Until that happens, the trend is likely to continue, and the consequences will keep moving down the line, from ranch gates to processing plants to dinner tables across the country. If you've been hearing whispers that cattle ranchers across California are selling off their herds and wondering why the governor suddenly seems alarmed, let me walk you through what's really going on, because this story is bigger than it sounds. This isn't just about cows being sold at auction, it's about pressure building quietly across the state, ranch by ranch, until it finally hits a breaking point that no state leader can ignore. Right now, California's cattle country looks very different than it did just a few years ago. You drive past ranches, and instead of thick grass, you see dry, dusty fields and empty pastures. Water is harder to secure and far more expensive. Feed prices are still painfully high. For ranchers, these aren't abstract problems, they are daily costs that show up on bills that have to be paid whether rain comes or not. So when ranchers load cattle onto trailers and head to the auction house, it's rarely because they want to, it's because the numbers no longer work.
But with livestock feed in high demand and low supply, it's getting increasingly expensive to feed them.
At auctions across the state, you're seeing a mix of anxiety and resignation. Ranchers stand quietly as animals they plan to keep for years are sold in minutes. Some of these cattle are breeding cows and heifers, the animals that produce future calves. Selling them brings in quick cash, but it also cuts off future income. One rancher described it as selling the roof to pay the rent. Another said, "If I keep them, I go broke now. If I sell them, I might survive, but my ranch shrinks." These decisions are gut-wrenching, and they're happening more often than people realize. This is where the long-term consequences start stacking up. When ranchers sell breeding stock, they're not just trimming fat, they're cutting into the future of the ranch. Fewer cows today means fewer calves next year. Fewer calves mean fewer animals going into feedlots later on. That eventually leads to tighter beef supplies. The U.S. cattle and calf inventory as of January 1st, 2025, sits at about 86.7 million head, which is roughly 1% lower than the year before. That may not sound dramatic, but in an industry this large, a 1% drop is huge. It signals that the herd is shrinking, not growing. California plays an important role in this picture. While it's not the biggest cattle state, it is a major agricultural powerhouse with deep connections to processing, transportation, and regional food supply. When California ranchers reduce herds, the impact ripples outward. Feedlots see fewer animals coming in. Processors start adjusting shifts or slowing operations. In some cases, plants are reshuffling production or even closing facilities because there simply aren't enough cattle to justify full capacity. That's when the problem lands squarely on the governor's desk. From the governor's point of view, this is a nightmare scenario unfolding in slow motion. Shrinking herds don't just affect ranchers, they affect food prices for everyone. Beef prices are already hitting record or near record highs this year, and tight supply is a big reason why. When supply drops and demand stays steady, prices go up. It's basic economics, but the real-world impact is families paying more at the grocery store and restaurants raising menu prices. That kind of inflation pressure is politically and economically dangerous. What makes it worse is the delay built into the system. Even if conditions suddenly improve, you can't replace breeding animals overnight. It takes time for cows to calve and for those calves to grow. The effects of today's sell-offs will be felt months and even years down the line. That's why state leaders are so concerned. They know that by the time consumers fully notice, it will be too late to reverse course quickly. Talk to ranchers and you hear the same conflict again and again. Do you sell now to survive, or do you hold on and risk losing everything? For many, selling part of the herd is a strategic move, not a surrender. They're trying to stay lean enough to make it through drought and high costs, hoping they can rebuild later. But rebuilding is expensive and uncertain. Some ranchers admit they're not sure they'll ever get back to their old herd size. Others worry that one more bad year will push them out entirely. The emotional toll is heavy. Ranching is often a family business passed down through generations. Selling off cows that have been bred carefully over years feels like undoing decades of work. One rancher said the hardest part wasn't the financial loss, it was watching empty pastures where cattle should be grazing. Those empty fields are becoming more common, and they tell a story of stress that spreadsheets don't capture. Meanwhile, feedlots and processors are watching these trends closely. With fewer cattle coming through the pipeline, they're forced to make tough decisions of their own. Adjusting operations, reducing hours, or shutting down plants affects workers and local economies. These changes reinforce the governor's concern that this is no longer a localized farm issue, but a statewide economic risk.
Well, there may be a little bit of slowdown the last.
From the outside, it might seem confusing why cattle ranchers selling animals would cause panic at the state level. But once you connect the dots, it becomes clear. Ranchers selling breeding stock today means less beef tomorrow. Less beef means higher prices, tighter supplies, and more pressure on families already dealing with rising food costs. It also means long-term damage to an industry that can't be rebuilt quickly once it shrinks. Standing in an auction house or looking out over an empty pasture, the problem feels very real and very immediate. For the governor, it's a warning sign flashing red. This isn't just about weather or markets. It's about the resilience of the food system itself. Ranchers are making survival choices one by one, and together those choices are reshaping California's cattle industry in ways that could be felt for years to come. Let me explain why the governor of California is suddenly so worried about cattle ranchers selling off their herds, because once you see how this works, it's honestly hard not to be concerned. This isn't one of those stories where the impact is immediate and obvious. It's more like a slow-moving wave that starts quietly on ranch land and rolls forward until it crashes straight into grocery stores, meat counters, and family budgets. Right now, ranchers across California are selling cows they normally would never let go of. These aren't just animals ready for market. Many of them are breeding cows and heifers, the mothers of future calves. When ranchers do this, it's usually a last resort decision. Feed is expensive, water is limited, and pastures aren't producing enough grass. Keeping animals alive costs money every single day, and for many ranchers, those costs are now higher than what they can realistically recover later. Here's where the chain reaction really begins. Fewer cows today means fewer calves born tomorrow. Calves don't magically appear if the mother cows are gone. So when ranchers cut their breeding herds, the next calf crop shrinks automatically. That's the first domino. The second domino falls a few months later when there simply aren't as many young animals entering the system. Then comes the third stage, when feedlots notice fewer cattle arriving to be fattened up for market. This is when meat processors start feeling the pressure. Slaughterhouses and packing plants depend on a steady flow of cattle to operate efficiently. When fewer animals are available, plants can't run at full capacity. Some cut shifts, others slow production. In more serious cases, companies reshuffle operations or shut down facilities entirely because it doesn't make sense to keep the lights on without enough cattle coming through the gates. That kind of disruption has already been happening in parts of the industry, and it sends a clear signal that supplies are tightening. The really tricky part is timing. There's a built-in delay in the cattle industry that most people don't think about. There's roughly a 6 to 12-month lag from breeding decisions to supermarket meat. That means the choices ranchers are making today won't show up in the meat aisle tomorrow. They'll show up later, sometimes much later. By the time consumers start noticing higher prices or missing cuts, the damage has already been done, and there's no quick fix. From the governor's point of view, this lag is what makes the situation so dangerous. You can't just flip a switch and fix it. Even if conditions improve, rebuilding a herd takes time. Cows need to be bred, calves need to be born, and those calves need months to grow before they ever reach a processing plant. In the meantime, the supply keeps tightening. That's when retail beef prices climb, sometimes sharply, and certain cuts become harder to find. If you've noticed beef prices already feeling high, that's not your imagination. Tight supplies combined with strong demand push prices up fast. When processors are under stress and plants are operating below capacity, those costs get passed along the chain. Grocery stores pay more, restaurants pay more, and eventually consumers pay more. Sometimes it's not just higher prices, but limited availability. Certain popular cuts can sell out quickly, forcing stores to adjust offerings or source meat from farther away. For ranchers, this is incredibly frustrating because many of them know exactly what's coming. They understand that selling cows today will hurt the market tomorrow, but they don't have the luxury of waiting. It becomes a choice between selling now to survive or holding on and risking bankruptcy. One rancher put it this way: "If I keep them, I bleed money every day. If I sell them, at least I can pay my bills." That's not a strategic choice anyone wants to make, but it's the reality many are facing. Meanwhile, empty pastures are becoming more common. Where you'd expect to see cattle grazing, there's often nothing but dry grass and dust. Feedlots that once stayed busy year-round are quieter. Auction houses are active, but the mood is tense, not celebratory. These are visible signs that the system is under strain, even if the average shopper hasn't fully felt it yet. This is why the governor's concern is escalating into something close to panic. State leaders know that food supply issues don't stay isolated. Once they spread, they're expensive and politically risky to deal with. Higher beef prices hit families already struggling with food costs. Plant closures hit workers and rural communities. Reduced in-state production increases reliance on outside sources, which brings its own risks and costs.
Of cattle ranchers have to stop using river water to irrigate their pastures, or start using river water to irrigate.
What makes it worse is that once ranchers exit the industry, many don't come back. Selling off herds can be the beginning of a permanent shutdown for family operations. Rebuilding requires capital, land, water, and confidence in the future. If too many ranchers decide it's not worth the gamble, California could lose a significant chunk of its cattle infrastructure, and that loss would echo for years. So when you hear that ranchers are selling cows and the governor is reacting strongly, it's not an overreaction. It's a response to a chain that's already in motion. Fewer cows lead to fewer calves Fewer calves lead to fewer animals to process. That leads to tighter slaughter supplies, stressed meatpacking plants, higher retail prices, and potential shortages of certain cuts. And because of that 6 to 12 month lag, by the time most people notice, the window to prevent it has already closed. This is one of those moments where what's happening out in the fields and feedlots today will shape what shows up on dinner plates tomorrow. The warning signs are there in empty pastures, quiet feedlots, and busy auction houses. The governor sees those signs, and that's why this story matters far beyond the ranch gate.